I was on a gig with, did one of those live from here shows with Chris Thiele, and we were in Kentucky, and he decided he wanted to do Old Home Place. And I decided to try to learn Tony Rice's solo. I'd never really spent time with it. I'd listened to it since I was a kid, and you had a video teaching that guitar solo, and that was me backstage for about 10 minutes with you.
I'm glad it served you well.
So thanks. And the moral of the story is when I got out during the show and did it, I completely blew it.
Hey folks, so today we're talking with Bryan Sutton. That's right, we have the man right here in studio. So I've been getting a lot of questions about improvising, and one of my more popular videos is, I think it's called Bluegrass Improvising Exercises, actually. And I figured we could have Bryan here, and Bryan could give us some more information about playing over fiddle tunes, how you might construct a break, how you might work with a melody. Anyway, Bryan, how you doing?
I'm great, Marcel. Nice to see you. Hope your day's well over there in Cary, North Carolina.
Yeah, things are good. You know, it's funny, I'm so close to Raleigh. Normally I'm in downtown, but now I'm just at home.
Right. Me too.
It's been so nice, actually, since this whole thing started, because whenever I see you, you're in this same room with the records behind you.
Yeah, this is where I do. I mean, I'm in a little room that you can't see it, but to my left over here is my little recording rig that that's where I'll be working tomorrow, doing some songs for some folks. And but here at this wall, I used to just have a blue backdrop that I used for the ArtistWorks lessons, and that got boring after 5 or 6 years, and so I've just been trying to think of ways to spice it up a bit. And I had all these records laying around, so it seemed like a fun thing to do, to tack them to the wall.
Yeah, it's like I'm seeing you in your natural environment. This is the only place that anyone sees Bryan Sutton now, next to the records. I
have a bed that you can't see on the other side of the computer, and my wife brings me food 3 times a day. And then that's me in a D28. That's how I do the pandemic.
Is there a slot in the door where she puts the food through?
You know, it's mashed potatoes and stuff that kind of just make its way one way or another through, various crevices.
Well, let's get into this thing.
Okay.
Maybe we should pick a fiddle tune that we want to work with. What's something that everyone knows, like Big Scioto or Salt Creek? Kind of one of those.
Let's do Salt Creek. Maybe
a fun way to do this would be I would share with you some of my methodology, and maybe you can poke some holes in it.
Okay. Can't wait.
So one thing I really like to look at in a melody like Salt Creek is how all 4 of the phrases are constructed, because they're all the same length. They're all kind of a traditional tag length. So in this first 2 measures, well, I guess I should put my capo on, huh?
I'm already going to start, just trashing you right now. How dare you play this without a capo?
just in case a mandolin player is watching.
I'm going to do the same.
So if I was playing the simplest version of this melody, right? That length of that phrase is the same as the length of this phrase. And of course, it's the same phrase again. And of course, the tag at the end is going to be the same phrase again.
Right.
So to a really basic improviser, one question I might pose to them is if they could make new phrases that land in the same places.
Mm-hmm.
So this won't be the most high-level improvisation, but at least you're following the chord changes and you're playing new language.
I think it's great. I think, you made a point of, I forget what was the term you used. It's not high level, or it's not, you kind of downplayed what you were getting ready to demonstrate. And I would say that any variation is a variation, whether it's the most simplistic thing, and sometimes that can be a hammer-on or a pull-off where there wasn't one before. And I think part of opening the door to true improvisation and what real possibility is, you have to acknowledge that it can be anything. It can be as complex or as simplistic as you're feeling right now. To the stuff of what happens, again, you want that to be different. You want that to sort of be varied. You're one of the things we're trying to do is to not just create another Salt Creek, but a way to interpret and play with Salt Creek. But starting with the phrases as an essential kind of recognition of the structure is pretty huge. Yeah.
I look at that and I think, for instance, if I was at a jam and someone kicked off a tune, they play a straight melody, and the next person did something like that, or maybe even a little bit less or a little bit more, I would feel really good about the development about that tune through the jam, right? Sort of, we're still playing with the melody is still alive, and this next break felt like the song. I guess a fun question to ask would be, what would the next person do, right? If they wanted to branch out even more as it moves around the circle, what do you think might happen?
Well, again, I don't know how deep you like to go with these kind of discussions. For me, what you're doing is opening up this door to what musicianship is and listening and noticing things like musical narrative. There's a concept in improvisation called yes and, which is used a lot like in acting and two comedians or three comedians on stage just kind of riffing. And the only rule is everything is agreed to, and your only job is to, upon that agreement, add to it. That's the yes, and then the and is what comes next. So again, to kind of really unpack your question there, if I am in a jam and I'm listening to somebody doing something, a lot of times I'm not paying so much attention to everything that they're playing. If it's, somebody playing the version of Salt Creek in front of me in a jam, but I am kind of paying attention to how they land their solo. So, if the B section and their fourth phrase does something like this, I might start the next solo that I'm playing, answer that in some way. And just the handshake of the last phrase, it's the baton, handoff in a relay race where, as long as they get to that spot of handoff, that's the one that I find, at least for me, I enjoy that moment of listening and reacting. And what that does for me, and again, this gets back into more of this sort of spirit of improvisation and what possibility really is. It's like success for me is feeling like that the and that I've played to their yes is something that just feels reactive. Success is the fact that I've reacted, not thought about what I'm going to play or tried to insist that I had to get this cool lick in here, but totally submitting and in agreement with whatever just happened. That is, to me, that's the true improvisational spirit. Again, in its various forms. When I'm in agreement with whatever happened, and I define success by my level of noticing that I'm reacting to that. That's the job. And what's cool about that as the job is that as I am now engaging in my version of how I'm going to play with this melody, a lot of times that little one thing can kind of initiate the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. So that internal conversation I'm having with myself now to listen and agree and react, all starts with that spark. And the cool thing is it can be different every time.
Yeah. You said a lot of things that I really liked right there.
Thank you.
One of them is that you brought up improv comedy, the yes and. I made a video about that. It's about bluegrass improvising and the rules of improv comedy and trying to relate them to each other. You're exactly right. It's so incredible. It's so awesome when you hear improvisers play with those things, those concepts.
And we were chatting a little bit before this interview on the email and just kind of the potential limitations in the world of bluegrass and how people sort of become a little more insistent for various reasons about what lick needs to go, what place, and basically that kind of approach, or I'm limiting myself with one scale position or a variation, those kind of limits basically prevent you from that potential listening and reacting, and they really stand in the way of that. And it's tricky because it's risky, and it makes you vulnerable, and it could fly off the hinges at any given point. But that's part of the fun of it too. Yeah,
there's a fine balance between being referential and being like derivative, in a negative way. Like the Tony Rice tag that you always hear, the da da doo da 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 ba da da doo da, has become almost like a little meme, or the longer version. Yeah, and yeah, exactly.
That one.
It's become such a repeated phrase that when we hear it so much, it kind of becomes nothing. Almost to the point of me being a little disappointed when I hear it now. Sometimes it feels good, it's dropped in the right spot like a hammer, and I'm like, oh, that's the thing. But sometimes I'm like, man, you could have done something that meant more.
Well, you're bringing up a really cool thing about what bluegrass, or at least my experience in bluegrass, is this sweet spot. I was the word you'd reverential to the past, to the tradition, to the way Doc Watson or Tony Rice or Dan Crary or Kenny Smith or whoever just played it in a jam. I honor that. I recognize that as a value thing. I recognize that bluegrass as a form of music is relatively simplistic. Like you just pointed out the phrasing of Salt Creek, how it's really what, three phrases, even though it's the first and third phrase are repeats. The second phrase is kind of an answer to the first, and the fourth, as it presents in most fiddle tunes is just some kind of little da-ba-doo-ba-da, boo-ba-da, boom, boom. 1-5-1, kind of here we are at the end of the song. In few cases does that fourth phrase really offer some kind of new bit of melodic information. Anyway, the point is that bluegrass as a general style, genre, or whatever, is more simplistic than it is complex. And what I've found in my own kind of dealing with my own playing of like, man, I should have done something other than just that same thing that I'm always doing. Trying to be kind to myself or kind to other people that are going to do that potentially and say, okay, that's part of what we're doing here. We're playing songs that have 3 chords. If it's a fiddle tune like Whiskey Before Breakfast, it's the major scale is really the primary informant. And I've played this since I was 7 years old. So I'm surely in a 3-chord song with all these same notes, probably going to, notice some redundancy here and there. But am I going to, again, sort of like in this whole spirit of okayness, yes, and it's like, all right, that happened. That's what I've done with myself, is to try not to be recognize it for what it is. It is simplistic. I will be in some of these same places again. So will you. So will everybody else. And so, that's part of the scene. And again, to the characters in bluegrass, like Tony Rice, that thankfully gifted us with this wealth of like how to interpret these tunes. And there's value to really spend a lot of time studying Tony, because the real value in studying Tony is not the fact that here's lick number 3, but understanding kind of the whole system that is Tony Rice and the whole sort of thought process that he represents, and then understanding kind of how that was varied at the little different spots. And that's the beauty of YouTube too, is to be able to go listen to him play the same song on record, live 15 different times, and to hear how it's same, how it's different, how he used that basic kind of minor pentatonic with the flat third or the flat fifth and the natural 7 and that kind of stuff. I mean, how that presented itself in so many different ways. Chris Eldridge and I had a big conversation about that years ago, about just sort of the system of Tony Rice is where I would wish people would spend more time versus just writing down the licks, right? It's a system. It's a way to approach guitar playing. It's a methodology in and of itself. Anyway, there you go. I digress.
The Tony Rice thing is a big conversation.
It is.
It's a big thing to get into. But you're right. There is tons of benefit in studying it, especially because Tony got a chance to play long-lasting breaks over traditional tunes that didn't have guitar breaks.
He was in that, there was the generational thing in bluegrass is important to recognize, where there were players before him. But for me, if you really want to unpack it, it's like recording technology, the various figures that were people like J.D. Crowe and Ricky Skaggs and Jerry Douglas, Sam Bush, and the way they all kind of fed off each other. It's just like this huge, beautiful petri dish of exciting reinterpretations of the 30 years before them.
That's right. I like that you called it a system too. You could probably teach a computer to make a, let's say, medium convincing Tony Rice break, and say,
yeah, right.
The flat fifths go down, the minor to major third moves up, and you give it, 300 rules, and maybe it could make something like Tony Rice.
Tony Rice algorithm. That's what the what's that, Watson IBM computer?
Yeah, exactly.
That's when it's officially going to have real value.
So, all right, let's go all the way back to when you were talking about shaking hands with the previous break. I love the idea of grabbing a snippet of something that someone else played and including it. And you gave a really cool example because you didn't take the melodic content, you took the rhythmic content. And so how that other break ended, you're just copying the structure of the rhythm. It's like a rhythmic motif rather than a melodic motif. I think a lot of times young bluegrass players or new bluegrass players tend to think of everything as being a constant stream of eighth notes. Bop, 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 bop,
right.
bop, bop. And that's actually, it's probably a good way to practice, just to make sure you can do that if you wanted to. But that's not always the right answer. If you had any advice for people that are looking to take up more rhythmic motifs, what would you say?
And it's in the word motif. A motif as a little musical nugget or some recognizable kind of very digestible bit of musical stuff, whether it be a harmonic thing or a rhythmic thing. We can practice that. I have these sort of 3 methods of practicing improvisation that challenge not just what is it or what is the motif, but how, as I'm engaged in real time with the song, how can I notice this at all times. And so we're recognizing layers. And when we kind of give into that idea of layers, that again, for me, shows us things to practice, like in general, just to unpack it a little more. And I'll get back to that. Like practicing improv for me, and this, a stream of eighth notes can be a motif too, right? But the point is that, do I hear the chords being communicated? And so I can practice improv to where I'm not really thinking about the melody at all, and I'm just working to communicate the chords. Right? That was just me knowing the chords and the structure of Salt Creek, using some lines of eighth notes, using some space. But the point is that, we can practice that. We can practice just in it. That calls into realization for us. Am I familiar enough with what's available on the fretboard to be able to communicate those chord changes? So that's one thing. And again, as it leads to where we're going, the next level of things to practice are melodic variations. And that's where we want to know the melody. I want to have this melody internalized, because to the point of the motif, it all exists in context to how deeply aware we are of the song or not. So if I can vocalize this melody, it proves to me, I know this song. I don't have to be looking at a tab. I'm not stuck in muscle memory. So again, what I'm doing is opening up these doors. So when these motifs happen, they're happening in context to my awareness of the basic structure, the functional structure of where chords are, where phrases are, and the specific notes of the melody. So the motif kind of recognition, to me, is a little bit of a higher layer where, based on chords and melody, these other things start happening. And this, Marcel, is sort of my goal for myself, is to feel that I'm consistently connected to the song. Even though that motif is happening, like when I did that thing earlier, I wasn't consciously aware of how I was going to get to the to whatever chord was coming up in the first phrase, but I knew, and I could trust enough of where I was in the song. So that allowed me to focus on the motif that happened. So whether it's a rhythmic motif, and this is what we can practice, this is an exercise here, all that to say this, and this can be sort of endless as far as little rhythmic motifs, and one that I oftentimes choose is something like ba-dum, ba-dum, right? That's the little musical nugget, ba-dum, ba-dum. So if I want to say, okay, success is how much I feel that in various ways in Salt Creek, 2, 3, 4. Right, that kind of stuff where you hear the melody. You obviously know that I'm playing Salt Creek. You hear that in my playing, but you hear that other layer, that little motif. And being able to practice that does a couple of different things. One, it challenges me to react and listen and have an intent for that and agree with it as it's flying along. So as an improvisational practice, its value is in it has me scramble sometimes because I don't know how that's going to reveal itself. I'm doing anything but inserting licks, inserting preconceived notions of how this ought to go. I've come up with some little thing that could be 1,000 different versions of itself, and then it could even change as I travel through the song too, if I really want to be open for it. So that's a thing we can practice based on those fundamental layers of structure and melody. The motif as it exists in context to those things can be practiced in its various ways, either as a harmonic thing or even a melodic thing. Like if I said, pick a note, Marcel.
Do you want a note in the song, or you just want a random note?
Yeah, just name a note.
How about E?
E. All right, so E is going to be an aim point for this song. I mean, again, I'm playing with it now, and that's calling into some higher levels of me being aware of sort of how to, navigate through this tricky water of really making sure I hear that. But to the big point of where we're getting at, if somebody did that in this sort of listening and reacting part in a jam, then I'm going to notice that. Because I've practiced things like that, and it's not about the E in Salt Creek. It's just about the concept of these other things happening while the tune is happening, and being, again, kind of committed to that more reactive part of ourselves, willing to risk, willing to, again, not be so insistent about one thing or another. And so, again, just as a way to practice improv, you know it's working when you don't know what's going to happen next, when you're scared of it, when it makes you vulnerable, it could fall apart. It's kind of embracing a bit of chaos, and that's when it's good. But that's what pays off in the real world of performance or jamming, when I'm more comfortable just knowing that stuff exists, and I'm comfortable because of the experience of more listening and more reacting, less insisting.
I love the idea of you picking up on a detail like that. The idea that someone keeps coming, almost like they're peddling this note or something. You see the game and you're like, oh, I know what game you're playing. I can play that game too.
Well, it's gamification, and it's like, no, it's my daughters played volleyball, and they had this, they'd sit around and pepper with each other, and it was like no balls on the floor, right? Uh-huh. And that's sort of like keeping that ball of the motif in the air at all times, and you don't want to drop it. And the other thing that I've noticed, and people can go check this out, when you listen to Chris Thiele improvise, you're hearing a lot of this kind of stuff. You're hearing him notice motifs in the middle of his playing and kind of chase that for a little while, like a dog chasing a leaf flying through the air.
Yeah.
And it's playful, right? And Bela Fleck does the same thing. All good improvisers do it.
How this whole thing happened, by the way, is that someone mentioned Bryan Sutton and I in the same comment on a Facebook group, on the Bluegrass Guitar Facebook group. And so, I just went down there and I was like, hey, Bryan, let's hang out. And Bryan sent me an email. But in that message that I sent you, I referenced this performance that you and Chris Thiele do. It's on YouTube. It's split into two parts. I think it's Wood Songs is the venue, right?
I think so, yeah.
But you guys basically, if I remember correctly, you took the second set and you just played duo, improvised, referential. You just played off each other and you included fiddle tunes. You kept going back to the fox tune. And but you got other things in there. You got like Norwegian wood in there. You got like a bunch of like little interesting snippets that are buried in this thing. And it's exactly what you're talking about.
Gosh, I don't know how many years ago that was, maybe 15 years ago, 12, 15 or more. Anyway, the point is that Chris and I were around each other more. And I remember years of like IBMA late night jams or out in Telluride. I mean, he and I were just silly for a jam and would be a lot of times the last people there. People would just fall out, be too tired. It's 3 or 4, pushing 5 or 6 in the morning, and he and I are still just going at it. And but where those would get to was this, and I feel fortunate at this point to have had those moments with him, because we would get to where the musical conversation would get so fluid and so automatic and so subconscious that we would literally start like answering each other's question before they were asked. And somebody that's been in kind of a deep relationship, just even as you're talking, kind of knows what what I'm talking about. But this would happen musically. And it was amazing. It was just fun. It wasn't like one of these things like, oh, wow, look what we're doing. And it's cool that we're able to do this. But it was just like, this is joyful. And this sublime kind of experience of just things happening musically. I don't know that we've done that. We did that on stage a couple of times here and there, or have done things like that. But I don't know that we ever were able to, because you can't force that stuff. That's the way you lose the game is to acknowledge the game. But when that would happen, it was nothing like it. Again, I don't think we ever really quite got to where we would get to just some organic version of that and 7 hours into a jam session. But anyway, the point is that he and I have a history of doing that kind of stuff.
Well, if anyone hasn't seen that video, they should go search it up. It is really fun, and if you have the opportunity to watch it multiple times, try to see where they cue each other or where they get their references, because that's part of the fun of it. You just like you said, there's some moments where it's hard to catch where the cue or where the reference or whatever it was, and it's like, man, it's beat one and you guys are in a totally different groove, or you're on another planet. Sometimes I can pick up like a thread, and I'm like, oh, this is, I heard someone play that, and now we're in that world, right? Like we zoomed in on that idea.
To the thing that we've been talking about before, just even if it's not a motif, even if it's like it's an energy, it's like a lean. You can sort of feel where somebody's going with something, and this speaks to lots of experience and lots of trust with maybe band members or people you jam with. It's fun to kind of guess where they're going. And when you do get it right, and you are risking getting it wrong too, but when you get it right, it's like, how in the world did that happen? And it's where music sort of does turn into sort of magic on occasion. And you see it in sports too. Like, how in the world did that alley-oop thing just happen?
Right.
Where did they work that out?
I feel like you get to see a lot of that with harmony singers that are really good at following each other, and they have this just unspoken bond and connection. And even when lines get changed, like someone adds that little turn or little fall or something, and the harmony singer's doing it, and you're like, how did you guys? I know you didn't work it out. You guys just have such a close connection. It's amazing to see that happen.
I tend to try to believe in these levels of our subconscious and the potential for us as humans to be so much more adept when we can get out of our own way. And if anytime, like I was saying earlier, like for Chris and I to do that on stage, we had some good moments, but I would call it forced compared to the ones that we had in jam sessions, that were more, like I say, subconscious. But when we can go there, our subconscious can do millions and millions of little things, like pick up on those cues, those more emotive cues versus just some obvious note or rhythmic cadence or something like that. And that's for me, that's loving that kind of stuff. I'm a geek about, psychology and sociology and how humans kind of interact and what all that means. And on the musical end, just what are you allowing yourself to pick up, or what, again, to that other, what I feel like a lot of bluegrass guitarists fall in the trap of, I'm trying to insist that lick 3 goes into phrase 4, and, it turns into real compartmentalized thinking. I use the term like you're either doing music or you're being musical, and being musical is the goal.
I don't know. It's so nice to hear you talk about all these things. It's nice to hear us agree too. My hope is that as more people come into bluegrass and people find this improvisational aspect and they're trying to figure out how to deal with it, there's resources here for them to start thinking, how do I think, what's going through people's minds as they structure these out. So it's nice to have you here to have that conversation and for you to give us a glimpse into your mind a little bit.
Well, thank you. You're kind. I know, like, we're always trying to, and on ArtistWorks, I'm always trying to figure out, more succinct, simple ways to say it. And sometimes there is, but at the end of the day too, that's part of what's beautiful about a lot of improvisational chat, is that it can be concrete and can be things to practice, but also it's mysterious. Music is when it's the reason we love it, and are these things that are hard to describe, and I think just to honor that it's not something it's not a beast that we conquer. We can sort of feel like that, and we can have these aha moments of, I put these little things together and some new things start happening, and that's great. But that spark, that joy, that's in the sort of the fun and the mystery and the playfulness of it, that's what I love ultimately too.
Where can the people find you? What are you working on right now? I know there's no live shows to go to, but all the same.
I mean, the ArtistWorks thing has really taken off this year because we're all home. And so I'm really happy to have that for me. I mean, I've been doing that for 10 years, so it's very much kind of established as far as what I do there. And so it's nice to see new folks come in the door. And what we cover there is, much more than just improvising with fiddle tunes. I'm ultimately going to be a big fan of sort of the mechanics and technique, the how we play as it affects the quality of what we play. I'm going to come down on the side. I don't care how well thought out your musical ideas are when you're playing an acoustic guitar in a bluegrass band. If you can't hear it, if there's not some expressive groove qualities built into your mechanics, and I know you've got some good videos about that too. For me, it's a blend of all that, the how we play and the what we play. But that's what we're talking about at ArtistWorks. But as far as music, yeah, when we're all home, I worked on a record with Bela Fleck last year. We're actually supposed to be on the road today. And I think most of those contracts have basically just been forwarded to next year, with some hopefulness that we'll be at a point where people, some more shows might be happening. But other than that, I'm also very fortunate. Just Nashville as a music community got, for intents and purposes, back online back in the summer. Thankfully, that community has been aware and doing things to try to keep people as comfortable and safe as possible. Sort of built into recording studio, especially as the acoustic guitar player, that I'm usually in a room not quite much bigger than the little closet I'm in right now, and so it's been social isolation for 20 years in that world for me. But that's been a good thing, to just keep the guitar in my hands.
We're all looking for ways to play. I think everyone's recording at home now. That's the way it goes. Lovely having you here today. Hopefully we have you back sometime soon and you can tell us a little bit more about that technique. I'd love to hear your opinions on that.
Well, thanks. I love talking about this improvisational stuff. The thing I love about it, to sum it up for at least my goal in talking about this with people, is to not just give stuff to work on, but like, the reveal here is finding you in this music, right? We can all try to sound like Tony Rice till we're blue, but we're never going to do it. Thankfully, he's Tony Rice, and that's beautiful. And you're Marcel, and I'm me, and David Greer is David Greer, thankfully. And I can learn from all that. But what hopefully is revealed is my own sort of ownership or voice within that. And I think that therein lies the true kind of goal, is, especially in bluegrass, is to find yourself in all this great music.
All right, everyone. You know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Once again, great having Bryan here. We'll see you all around the channel soon. See you all later.
Feel free to edit that however you need.
I'm going to cut out all the pieces with you, and it's just me talking to myself.
Okay, great. That'll be great.